Well, thank you very much for staying with us. Good afternoon. The national disability prevalence rate in the country is 7.5%, and Statistics South Africa says employees with disabilities make up only 1% of the workforce. Is that enough? The Employment Equity Act calls for fair representation of South Africa's demographics, including those living with disabilities within the workforce. However, transformation specialists say businesses not only have a legal and moral obligation to hire people living with disabilities, but they also stand to benefit financially from tax breaks and government incentives. So to tell us more about that is Roxanne Da Mata Gonçalves of Strata-g Labor Solutions. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so much, Colin, for having me.
Yeah, help us with painting a picture about the plight of workers in the workplace in terms of their well-being, their disability. How is it like?
Well, I think in most instances, companies have placed individuals with disabilities at a disadvantage because of the fact that, first of all, the recruitment, the platform itself doesn't allow access to that individual. The technique applied in terms of recruitment needs to be a specialized technique because it is a different environment altogether. Firstly. And secondly, I think most organizations do not sensitize the environment and pay attention to what the individuals need per se.
So at the moment, do you think that the disabled people feel discriminated at the workplace in terms of how they are positioned in terms of their input in the workplace? I'll give you an example, the sitting arrangement in terms of how they enter the building and how they move around.
It could possibly be in some environments, Colin. As far as our exposure goes with Strata-g's clients, I must say that an approach in terms of equality has been taken. However, most organizations aren't aware of their own barriers. They tend to think that disability is specifically focusing on people in a wheelchair, whereas disability is a far larger spectrum than only a physical or a visible disability. And when talking about accommodation in the workplace, it's not just a matter of the ergonomic environment itself, but also what the individual needs and requires to be able to accommodate performing at a much better level. There are roles in the organization that are performed at a far more efficient level and also speak to that kind of individual, the individual that statistically time and time again has proven to be more focused, less time away from the workstation, has more loyalty toward the company because it is obviously emotionally and physically more difficult for them to job hop more frequently. So the organization not only is blind to the fact that there might be certain barriers that they're not accommodating for, not necessarily through their own fault, because those individuals also have not been taught to verbalize what they need in order to accommodate their own disability. In many instances, these people have been treated as if they are spoon-fed and they are told what they need as opposed to asked.
So what about the fundamentals of personnel procurement in as far as a company being upfront with a post being open to accommodate disabled people? Is it done on a normal basis, or is it an arduous task for a company to say, by the way, if we are including disabled people, it means that we have extra work of making an arrangement in case we appoint a disabled person and the allocation of resources for the special needs?
So that's an interesting question, Colin. A lot of companies approach us with that kind of question, and it's mostly around the sensitivity of advertising, because it is obviously discrimination if one only singles out a particular group. So the approach that is more prudent is that we would speak specifically to platforms and organizations that host these particular individuals and liaise with them directly. And it's a far more onerous protocol in terms of employing a person with disability and hiring the right person, because it's not only the usual ordinary requirements, which is finding the correct person to fulfill the role, but also further to that, one would have to then find out, are they going to be a good culture fit for the organization? In turn of that, is the organization going to be able to accept, incorporate, and accommodate the individual? And it's an interesting concept, because one can only tell that once they've consulted with the individual through this recruitment process, as well as the company, because more often than not there is a misalignment in terms of their communication.
Yes, in as far as misalignment and communication is concerned, are you going to do anything about communicating with the disabled people themselves and organizations that represent them?
Absolutely. So we associate with a company called JDM Placements, Empowered Placements, and they are specifically specialized in not only the hiring process and the recruitment, but also the etiquette, educational phase in between how one as an individual with a disability integrates within the workplace, and how they communicate what they need in order to perform at an optimum level. And in so doing that, we also have the discussion on the part of the employer to ensure that they understand that when the individual communicates with the company, it's not necessarily a demand or what is perceived to be a sense of entitlement, but more so a request to be able to accommodate them to perform better. I think also another a misunderstanding between the employers and people with disabilities and hiring people with disabilities is there is always the extreme concept within a person's mind that they have to totally revolutionize and turn around their business to be able to accommodate these individuals, and it's not the case.
Look, my time is up, but on a parting shot, the frustrations of disabled people at the workplace are so painful that you find when you are on a wheelchair, you come across a steep and you don't have anybody to push you, or you go to the restroom and there's no one who will open the door for you if there aren't people passing. These kinds of arrangements to try and allay the fears and obliterate this kind of problem at the workplace. What's being done? Because you can't get help just because somebody was passing by. What if nobody's around?
Well, I think the major barrier in that sense, Colin, is the fact that there are other sources of reasonable accommodation that can assist the person with disability within the workplace. What puts the employer off per se is the cost involved, of course, because businesses are around to generate profit. And the government has come forward to be able to afford the organisation the opportunity to apply for funds in order to ergonomically accommodate these environments, whether it's an automatic door or a lift or whatever the case may be. One must realize as an employer, not only do we have the obligation from a legislative perspective, and there are many benefits from a BE perspective, as much as 21 points, so that can be 17% of your scorecard, but the government has gone as far as to offer windows where companies can apply for funding in order to aid them to make the environment as comfortable as possible for these individuals, because these individuals bring about diversity, and innovation comes from that. And innovation through the right company with the right response can turn it to profit.
Roxanne, certainly this is not the last time I speak to you about this subject. Just so much to talk about regarding the plight of disabled people at the workplace. But for now, thank you very much for making time.
Thank you, Colin.
Right, Roxanne Da Mata Gonçalves is of Strata-g Labour Solutions, talking to us right here on SABC News.